Vayetzei Yaakov Be'er-sheva Vayelech Harana. And Yaakov left Beer-sheva and went to Harana. So Chazal, Rashi are bothered by their redundant language. It's very easily could have said Vayetzei Yaakov Harana. Yaakov went to Harana. Who cares that he was coming from Beer-sheva? Why is that relevant here? So there are many answers to we've discussed, we'll discuss in the future, but the one I just want to focus on now is Vayetzei Yaakov. So Rashi quotes the famous Chazal that it wants to teach me that Yitziat Tzadek min hamakam osa rosham, that the reason why it says Vayetzei Yaakov Be'er-sheva is because Beer-sheva is not the same place it was, even with that, when Yaakov was there. That when a tzaddik leaves, he leaves an imprint. And the famous question is, so why is it the first time Rashi is telling us this? Avram left many places, Yitzchak left many places. Why is it that by Yaakov he left an imprint and Avram and Yitzchak did not leave an imprint? There are many answers, but one is that no, of course Avram and Yitzchak left an imprint. That's a given because they were more public figures, Avram more than Yitzchak, but Yitzchak followed in his father's footsteps and people still recognized him, he was famous. But Yaakov was the Ish Tam Yoshev Aholem. Yaakov was a person who was sitting and learning. And in fact, we all know, of course, if someone sets up hospitals, chesed organizations, are involved with community works, of course if that person leaves, they're going to be missed. You don't have to state the obvious. But I think Yaakov, if he's sitting and learning in Shem Ve'aver, sitting and learning in Yoshev Aholem, then maybe you won't notice the impact. But definitely on a metaphysical level, certainly that when a yeshiva leaves the community, or a kollel, I don't mean a kollel in terms of kollel that works with the community, that's a given. Even a kollel that basically no one even knows they're here. But the fact that their learning has an impact on the community. And in fact, that each of the avos had their own special midos. Avram was known for chesed, Yitzchak Gvura, Tefillah, and Yaakov Torah. In fact, that's what I think Rabbi Chanan points out. We find next week that the angel attacked Yaakov. The Sar Shel Esav, why attack Yaakov? Why not attack Avram and Yitzchak? So that's what Rabbi Chanan writes, that the Yetzer Hara, it's okay. You could do chesed all day, you could daven all day, but if you're not learning, he knows he doesn't have to worry. It's not going to last. It's not something you're able to give over. In fact, Rav Bernard Rebel commented that New York City didn't become, New York area did not become successful or more successful in terms of bringing religion until actually they started the yeshivas. He writes in the beginning, I think it was in the 1920s, or whatever the time was, that the Jews came over from Germany, and they were very big into chesed. Hospitals, chesed groups, they set that up. The Polish Yids came and set up a lot of shul shtibels. But it wasn't until the Litvaks came over and set up yeshivas, albeit I'm sure in the beginning there was a lot to be desired, but they set up the foundation, the networks, which eventually led to the yeshivas there are today. So that's what the Yisod is. The Yisod of Rashi is telling you, see, it's talking about a Makam Osa Roshem. When you set up a yeshiva, you have Yaakov learning and he's leaving, that's still going to have an impact. And that's what we see throughout, with the Esav, with the Malach. The Malach was only concerned about Yaakov. And that's how Rebbe explained that was the American Judaism were based on the foundation of Torah. Once they set up yeshivas, so everything else seemed to fall into place, albeit it took a long while, but the beginning of the foundation was set up. So in the beginning of Parashas Vayetzei, the Torah tells us Vayifka b'makom, and the Gemara in Brachas learns out from Vayifka b'makom that Yaakov Avinu instituted Tfilas Arvis. The Gemara in Brachas and Avchav Avin Beis, Chavav Avin Beis, goes back and tells us that Avram instituted Shacharis, Yitzchak instituted Mincha, and Yaakov Ma'ariv. The Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, when he's telling us about the Sheva Mitzvahs, he goes back to the beginning and tells us, he gives us a little history lesson. He tells us the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, so the big three. He lists the relations: murder, idol worship, and then Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Daled, Ever, Menachai, Birkas Hashem, Gezo, and Dinim. And then he goes in, Avram instituted Shacharis, and he did Milah, and Yitzchak, Hifresh, Maisa, I think the Hosef, Tefillah Acheret, he doesn't even call it Mincha, and Yaakov, Ma'ariv, and Gid Hanash, and he goes through the whole history lesson until we receive the Torah at Har Sinai. So the reason why we do mitzvahs isn't because Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, is because it was repeated to Moshe at Har Sinai. That's why the Rambam gives in the Yud Gomli Yikarim, one of the beliefs is you have to believe that Moshe Rabbeinu is the greatest of all prophets, or else that guarantees the Torah won't change. So that's what goes through the history. So the question is, maybe it's just coincidental. I mean, Avram, Shacharis, Yitzchak, Mincha, Yaakov, Ma'ariv, because that's just the order of the Avos. And that the answer is no, because in Judaism we go by Hi Erev Vayi Boker Yom Echad. The day begins at night. So if this would have been in the order of the Avos, it would have been Avram, Ma'ariv, Yitzchak, Shacharis, and Yaakov, Mincha. And the fact that we see Avram with Shachar shows it's not in a specific order, and each tefillah corresponds to the specific of. That Shacharis is different, Mincha is different, and Ma'ariv is different. In fact, they point out that the second letter of each of the Avos are merumas to which tefillah. Avraham, Beis, Boker, Yitzchak, Sadi, Saharayim, and Yaakov, Ayin, Erev. So there's and why not the first letter? Because we're showing it's hidden. It's not just open to. It's open. They all look like the same. Shacharis, Mincha, Ma'ariv. It looks like we're davening the same thing, but no, they're fundamentally different. Shacharis is the tefillah of Avraham. Mincha is Yitzchak, and Yaakov is Ma'ariv. And what do they represent? So that's what Mefarshim point out, that each one represents the way they related to their people, the way they were accepted. That's how the tefillah. So Avram was the rising star. He was very strong, military victories. He went ahead and he won the war. So he was on the 5 o'clock news. He was the person who was always, like the sun rising, that he was always on top, powerful, well-known, etc. And then we have Yitzchak, who basically also was. We have, then we'll go on the other extreme. We have Yaakov, which we were introduced to last week, and we get more of his involvement, his continued fighting with Esav and Lavan. His whole life is a bunch of sorrows, and at the end of his life, he's Bikesh Yaakov Leishe Bashalba. So Yaakov, that's Aravis. Aravis represents Golis. It represents Sar, Prunios, bad times. So Avram represents Shacharis, because that's what Shacharis. You wake up in the morning, you still have a lot of hope. The sun's shining. Ma'ariv, it's pitch dark. Because before we had lights outside, you go up to the country at night, the Catskills, wherever, you'll see it's like you can't see anything of it. You appreciate the moon. You actually get life in the moon. So you have on one hand you have Avram, and on the other hand you have Yaakov. In the middle you have Yitzchak. So Yitzchak, the Gemara says in Brachas that Mincha is, you get the most schar for Mincha, or it's the most difficult tefillah. Why is it the most difficult tefillah? So on one hand, pragmatically, it's the most difficult. They didn't get a Mincha minyan today. because you only have a short time span. I don't know, 1 o'clock, whatever the time is, from 1 to 4, whatever, 5, and it's getting shorter. For Shacharis, in theory, you could always wake up earlier. Ma'ariv, you could always say it later. But Mincha, so therefore, pragmatically, it's very difficult. However, but it's even more than that. Yitzchak it's the hardest time to daven because as David HaMelech tells us in Tehillim, there are 2 types of tefillah. There's the tefillah of Ma'ashiv LaHashem, called Talmud's Koshu Esa. God, how can I repay you? My cup's overflowing. I can't. If you're overcome with gratitude, things are so good, it's easier to pray to God and thank Him. When you win the lottery, it's easy to say, thank you, God. And similarly, during Yaakov and his constant, David HaMelech was running away from his own son. He was constantly, he had good times, he was running during his Sar. That's why it says David HaMelech's Tehillim is so great, because it wasn't so much what he wrote, because they say, because the Nebuchadnezzar also it says was going to write things that are going to put David to shame, but the Malach hit him and he stopped. So the question is, what happened to free choice? Why did they stop why did they stop Nebuchadnezzar from doing it? The answer, they didn't stop him. They just made it a little more difficult. It's easy when you're sitting there on the beach, when the wind's blowing and you're playing the guitar, you're writing notes. But when you stub your toe or you hit, you're in pain, and it's a whole different atmosphere. So Ma'ariv, that's also a time that's easy when there's the saying going, there's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. When the bombs are coming down, so who else am I going to turn to? There's no one else left. So therefore, those 2 extreme times are much easier to turn to, relate to Hashem. However, there's a much more difficult time, and that's the time of Yitzchak, that it's in between. It's on the one hand, it's almost sunset, but it's not dark. It's just, there's no special event happening, like the Gemara tells us in Rosh Hashanah, Yitzchak Amid Beis, in a different context. The Gemara is talking about the different fast days, that we fast 4 days during the year to correspond to the destruction of the temple. So the temple, we had what are the 4 fast days? The Som HaRavi, the fast of the 4th month, the Som HaChamishi. So the fast of the 4th month is Yud Zayin Tammuz. Som HaChamishi, the fast of the 5th month, Tisha B'Av. Som HaShavi, Som Gedalia, and Som HaAsiri, Asar B'Teves. So the pasuk says Som. At the end of the pasuk is Yebehem L'Sasan L'Simcha. On one hand, the pasuk says it's going to be a fast. On the other hand, it says it's going to be a happy day. Which one? So Gemara says it depends. During good times, peaceful times, and the Beis HaMikdash is up, so it's even going to be a Simcha celebration. It's a discussion regarding Tisha B'Av, because let's say, so after the destruction of the first temple, it was a fast day. What happened during Bayesheni? So during Bayesheni, the other fast days were certainly a Simcha. Tisha B'Av is a discussion whether it's a universal day of Avelos. It still never made it into a Yenta. But either way, putting Tisha B'Av aside, when the Beis HaMikdash was up, those days turned into Simcha. And during times of religious persecution, those were mandatory fast days. But during times when there's no religious persecution, but there's no Beis HaMikdash, the Gemara says, Ratzu Misanim, Ratzu Einu Misanim. You have the option of praying, option of fasting. Today we've taken upon ourselves that we makabel of kachova, that we have to. But what do we see? These 3 periods were foreshadowed in the Avos, that during the times of celebration, it's a simcha, that's Avram Avinu. During the time of the Churban, that's Yaakov. But Yitzchak was this middle stage where it wasn't a mandatory fasting because it was you're in limbo. Yitzchak was a stage where it wasn't, the sun's about to set. It's still good times now, but you could see the sun setting on you quickly. Vayetzei Yitzchak, he prayed Lifnos Arav right before evening. In fact, the truth be told, Adam Harishon actually was the first one to daven mincha. According to the Chida, the Arizal, or in the Sifrei Kabbalah, how do we know that Adam daven mincha? Because they learn out, the pasuk says, Vayetzei Yitzchak Asuach Basadeh. Ain't Sicha Ela Tefillah. I guess that's the meaning of talking and davening, right? Because they don't realize conversation means conversation with God, not with your next door neighbor. And what does the pasuk say in Bereshis? It's called Siach HaSadeh. So they learn out from the same word, Siach and Siach. So God specifically he wanted someone to pray for rain before he brought rain. So we have a Kabbalah that it was Adam Harishon who was actually the first one to daven mincha. Not mincha the way we know it, and we don't even have mincha the way Yitzchak know. We have the mincha of Anshe Knesset HaGadolah, but he was the first one to do it. So they point out, and that's why they point out that Shin Yud Ches, that's Tefillah, Ein Sichel Tefillah. The word Yesh, what is the numerical equivalent? It should come out to 317. So that's what we say. Yesh Shalomi Das, as the Katkar always says. A Yid should never be in Yesh. Yesh is only if you're Lomi Das, if you're not in your full mind. Because a Jew always has Amunah, a Jew always has HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so you never give up hope. So Yesh is Shin Yud is 317, Tefillah is Shin Yud Ches. So either way, that's what they point out, Adam daven mincha as well. But getting back to Yitzchak instituted mincha. He was in no man's land. It wasn't tremendous times of gratitude, and it wasn't terrible times of persecution. So that's perhaps the hardest time to daven, because you don't have that external event pushing you, because it's an everyday thing, and that's most of our lives. We don't have these usually extreme events daily. Unfortunately, if you live during the Holocaust or those times, you might have. But today most of the events are the daily things. And as the Meshach Chachma pointed out, that we say Ashrei 3 times a day, you zochet olam haba. Yet if you say Hallel every day, you're a macharef and a magadef. Last I checked, Ashrei comes in the book of Tehillim, and Hallel, how could I be one time the greatest, one time the worst? So the Meshach Chachma answers, because when do you say Hallel? You say Hallel on when a miracle happened. You're as good as your last step back, God. Until my next miracle, I don't want to hear from you. So therefore, if a person only sees God in the miracles, so that's it. So you're missing the whole essence of God. Ashrei is in the form of Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. It's the everyday things in life. You recognize God in everyday things, that person's going to be Zocheh, because it's the attitude shows you'll be Zocheh to Olam Haba. And that's what they point out as well. That Rav Dessler, there's a famous Gemara with Rav Yossi ben Kisma. Rav Yossi ben Kisma fell ill. He was sick. And I think it was Rav Yochanan, I'm not positive. One of the rabbis came to visit him to do Bikar Cholam, a mitzvah min HaTorah. And he said, how you doing, Rav Yossi ben Kisma? So Rav Yossi ben Kisma, first he rebuked him. Not for visiting him, that was okay. He said, Rav Yochanan, or this rabbi, there was a time during the Roman decree, and he was teaching Torah publicly, and at the risk of death if he got caught. So he rebuked him, don't teach Torah publicly, we need you. Continue teaching Torah, but do it privately. So therefore, so I guess he took the rebuke and did that. And then they're talking, and then so the rabbi said to Rav Yossi ben Kisma, he says, tell me something. Am I going to be Zochet to Olam Haba? He says, well, I don't know. Tell me something you did in your life. So, okay, yeah. It's always hard to come up with something when you ask. No, he didn't say that. He said, you know what? I remember some event I did. It was at Purim time, and I put money away for Matanas Rabyonim, gifts to the poor, and I mixed up some of my Suda money with the tzedakah. You know what? I gave the whole $5 to charity. So the Rabbi Yosef said, wow, did you do that? May my lot be like your lot. hope I get the schar you're going to get for doing that tremendous act. So the question is obvious, right? What are you talking about? Iker chasam in a sefer. Like he should have said, you know what I did? I risked my life in public to teach Torah. And then he should have said, that's the schar I'm going to get. And yet, a seemingly trivial thing, he's saying, wow, what a tremendous schar. So, Rav Dessler explains, because true greatness of character is on the little things in life, the everyday things. All of us, we get carried away during special times. And again, I'm being descriptive, I'm not saying it negatively. It's a mitzvah Kiddush Hashem, that even Jews who weren't observant. But so, when the Nazis came and they didn't know, they said, no, I'm Jewish. Take me with you, I'm going also. People, but during special times, or it's easy to get volunteers when the president's coming in, the prime minister, the chief rabbi, but to get someone to help to clean up the Shalashidis, at the end of the day, no one's here, no one cares. It's very hard to find people to do those. So it's the little things in life, passing the salt, holding the door over for someone, little things when there's no video cameras on you. As the people had discussions, who was greater, when Mother Teresa or like Lady Di? Because because Lady Di did all those things, so who knows who was greater? But one thing I can tell you is, because it's Mother Teresa was doing those things even when there was no one there. She was involved. I don't know, maybe she might have done it anyway, but it's easy to do chesed when they're taking pictures of you and they're going to be reporting back. They're going to have articles about you in the paper. That doesn't tell me anything about your character. This tells me, if you have seichel, that if you want to have something good, you better do something good. If not. It doesn't tell me anything about your character. It tells you more about what if you care about what other people think, and etc. So therefore, it's the little things that show the true greatness. So therefore, the fact he was willing to risk his life in public, that's a great thing. But it doesn't really tell me about his character. The fact he was able no one was there, he mixed up a little money. It's not so much the couple of dollars, it's the fact that has an impact on his character. And in fact, that's why it's the everyday things. In fact, that's what we even found by Avram, that there's different opinions. What was the last of the 10 tests? One opinion says it was Akedas Yitzchak, and the other one says it was the Nisayon with Ephron. So people ask, how could you compare the two? Let's go see, slaughtering your son or getting a burial plot. So the answer is, it's the same Yisod, that basically then you think you had such a hard day, you're running around, and then you have to put up with Ephron. But that's the true greatness, is even on the little things, on the everyday things, that you show self-control and you do those things. That's how, that's true greatness. And in fact, that's what the Torah tells us. Lech lecha. We know when God reveals this to Avram, it says Lech lecha. So, and go to the promised land, and I show you. Yet we know from the Medrash that Avram was willing to give up his life in Or Kasdim. He's willing to jump in the fire. In fact, that's the whole story with him and his brother. So you would think, if God wants to introduce Avram to the people, so what we would start out with Or Kasdim. Yet the Torah doesn't even mention Or Kasdim. It's just hinted to. The Torah begins with Lech Lecha. Why? So the commentators explain, Sukkot Stav and others, because what's the true litmus test of a Yid? Lo Aleinu, that we shouldn't have to go out Kiddush Hashem. It's a tremendous mitzvah if you do. Perhaps you go straight to Olam Haba. But those are, one-time shots. The true litmus test of a Yid is Lech Lecha. It's the everyday things. It's showing up, it's davening 3 times a day, showing up to minyan. It's the little things every day. And that's what they point. And that's the legacy of the others. From Avram we learn out you have to connect to God even when your kosh Yeshua's Esa, when your cup is overflowing. With Yaakov, you have to relate to God even during terrible times when the bombs are falling. But the legacy of Yitzchak, that we even have to relate to God even on everyday life, on the basic things of life. We woke up this morning, we could see, we could walk, on the little things in life. That's what the legacy of Yitzchak, and perhaps that's the most difficult one to have gratitude, and therefore that's why the Gemara tells us to get the most schar v'tzilas mincha, not because of the pragmatics per se, that also is true, but fundamentally it's the hardest time to turn to God, and relate to Him. Yeah, so we'll be reading Parashas Vayetzei this week.
Which means?
And we'll explain in a minute. The pasuk says, Vayetzei Yaakov mib'er shava vayelech Charana. And the pasuk says, Yaakov left. Vayetzei is leaving. It says Yaakov left Beersheba. That was the name of the place he was in. Vayelech Charana, and he went to Haran, another place. So that's what the Torah spells out. He left from Beersheba and went to Harana. So the question is obvious, it seems to be extra redundant. Why is it? I already know Yaakov left from Beersheba. Why did it have to? It should have just said Vayelach Yaakov Harana. Yaakov should have just went to Haran. It should have said. Why do we need the double language? So there are different answers the commentators teach us. That we know Jacob was very meticulous in honoring his parents, his mother and father. Even Esav Harasha, even the wicked Esav, was known for honoring his parents. But the Beis Halevi points out the Torah is going into great detail to tell me he left Beersheba and he went to Harana to tell me how careful Yaakov was in Kibbutz Rabbi. Where do we see honoring one's parents? Because why was Yaakov leaving Beersheba to go to Harana? Both his mother Rivka and his father Isaac told him he has to get out. He has to leave Beersheba. So from the mother's perspective, she just was concerned with her son's safety. That Esau was going after Yaakov to kill him, so he said, "You just better get out of here." The important thing is that he left town, not where he went. Anywhere out of Beersheba, he would be relatively safer. However, Vayelech Harana, Yitzchak told him to go back to his homeland in order to find a wife. So that's what the pasuk's telling me. He left Beersheba in fulfillment of honoring his mother's wishes. Vayelech Harana, he went to Harana to fulfill his father's wishes. So that's what the pasuk's telling me. That's why we need both. That's how the Beis Halevi from the Soloveitchik family explains. Another explanation, Rashi tells us, Lo hayisarach lichtov ela vayelach Yaakov Harana. It would have been sufficient for the Torah to tell me Jacob left Harana. V'lama hiskir yitziaso. Why does it mention that he left? Ela magid, it comes to teach me sheyitziat tzadik min hamakam osa rosham, that when a righteous person leaves a city, he leaves an impact. Shebizman shad tzadik be'ir, when a righteous person is in the city is blessed. But when a righteous person leaves the city, it has negative connotations. So that's what Rashi's telling me. The reason why I had to go in to tell me, it should have just said Yaakov went to Harana. Why do I need to know that Yaakov left Beersheba? Because it comes to teach me Beersheba will never be the same anymore. Beersheba with Yaakov, Beersheba without Yaakov are two different qualitative cities. It might be the same Beersheba, but there's different qualities of each, and therefore that's what he points out here, that he left Beersheba and went to Haran. So the question the commentators ask on Rashi is, why didn't they ever mention when Abraham leaves the city, or when Yitzchak, when Isaac leaves the city? Why doesn't it mention the town is no longer the same without Abraham? The town is no longer the same without Isaac. Why is it the first mention we find by Jacob? So there are many answers, but the one I'll share with you today is from the Avnei Shoam, as well as others, who point out, of course, when Abraham left the city, he was noticed. Of course, when Isaac left the city, he was noticed. Because Abraham was a man who was very involved with the people. He set up hospitals, he set up chesed organizations. He was a person of the people. And Yitzchak, to a little lower extent, he followed in the footsteps of his father. But when Yaakov was worried, Yaakov had a turning inward. He had to build a Jewish family that eventually the 12 tribes come from, the Shifteka. And therefore, of course, if someone who's involved in setting up hospitals, building buildings, leave, of course you're going to notice him because there's no one else to do it. And his presence will be noticed. But one might think Yaakov, who represents Torah, I might think that maybe, it's a big deal. So he wasn't really involved with anyone else. He was just learning in yeshiva. I might think the town isn't going to notice. Comes along Rashi and tells me, no, the town notices. That when you leave the town, they notice, and therefore it's not the same town anymore. In fact, that's what Bernard Revel, who was one of the presidents at Yeshiva University, points out, that each of our forefathers had different qualitative traits. Abraham was known for the acts of loving kindness, Yitzchak for prayer, and Yaakov for Torah. So Bernard Revel wants to say that paralleled New York City in the earlier years, that when the Jews from Germany came over in the 1920s, whenever it was, they were into chesed. They built hospitals, they helped build, Chevra Kadishas, different things. They built a lot of buildings that had to do with acts of loving kindness. And when the Poles came over, they set up more shtibluch. They were into davening. They made sure that there were more shuls around. But New York City didn't become a stronghold until later on, when the Litvaks came over and they built yeshivas. So, therefore, it's true, every Jewish organization, we need Torah, we need davening, we need chesed. But ultimately, if you don't have Torah institutions, you're never going to grow. It's only until New York got Torah institutions, was later turned into Yeshiva University, Lakewood, Chafetz Chaim, all these different, but the basis was that, and until then they really weren't growing. And in fact, that's why even Montreal had all the yeshivas. That's why they were able to grow at the end, eventually have thriving Jewish institutions. And in fact, that's why we'll see next week the angel started attacking Jacob. So the question is, why didn't the angel attack Abraham or Isaac? Why only attack Jacob? So Rav Elchanan Wasserman, one of the great rabbis in Branovich, who was killed by the Nazis, speaking of the week of Kristallnacht, he was killed by the Nazis, Yamach Shemo, So he pointed out that same idea, that when the Vayetzei, the evil inclination, is watching what's going on, he sees a person doing chesed all day, acts of loving kindness. It's very nice, but he's not that worried. He sees him just praying, saying Tehillim all day. It's nice, but he's not worried. But when he sees Yaakov, which represents Torah, the Jews are studying Torah and they opened up institutions and they're learning, then watch out. He realized that's the most potent force. And that's why it's by Yaakov it's spelled out, because I would think Yaakov, who is just involved in learning, maybe doesn't have an impact on the community. Yaakov has the biggest impact, or just as big as the others. And that's why it mentions that when he left the city, how many of us recognized, so we're saying when Yaakov left the city, he was realized. Hopefully, they would realize before he left. But the two parts to this. On one hand, Yaakov left the city. On the other hand, oh nice, eat it. But it was all this, oh, you found Bernie or you didn't see him?
Yeah. From my apartment.
Oh nice. See, she has a Hanukkah hustle shirt on. She's paying attention to the signs. That's what some people... Very good. So when they brought the U.S. for Parasha last week, remember? Yeah. And so they pointed out that there's two factors. One factor is everybody would have been missed but Yaakov. But another factor is the people you leave behind. When Abraham and Isaac went from town to town, they took everybody with them. So there's no one back in town to appreciate anymore what they did. They're all coming for the trip to Israel. But by Jacob, he left two great righteous people, his mommy and daddy, Rebecca and Isaac. So maybe you don't notice him. There's other righteous people. No. Everybody counts. And the lesson is obvious. No matter how thriving a community you live in, there's always more to do. There's always more classes to give. There's more acts of loving kindness to do. And that's the lesson we learned from Jacob. That Jacob, what does the Torah tell me he left Beersheba? Who cares where he left? I only care where he went to. Because the answer is Beersheba is never going to be the same anymore. Beersheba without Jacob is not the same with Beersheba after. Okay, that's one pasuk. Then it says what happened. Vayifka b'makam vayolen. All of a sudden, it became night, and the rabbis tell us he davened Ma'ariv, evening service, and he rested up, and he went to sleep. The stones gathered around and protected him. And of course, where the makam is the Beis HaMikdash. Yaakov fell asleep. He went where the future temple was going to be built in Jerusalem. And Vayachalom, and he had a dream. The Torah is telling us, how does a Jew survive the Golus, the exile, when you're living among the non-Jews? Now we're lucky we live in North America, Canada, the U.S., where the government openly, at least, is very nice to us. They treat us like everyone else. Of course, you're always going to have anti-Semites around, as we see in the news all day. But ultimately, we live in good times now. But Yaakov's whole life wasn't good. He was running away from Esau, who was trying to kill him. He was fighting with Lavan, the trickster. So how does a Jew survive the long exile? Vayachal, you have to dream, because you can't live in reality. If you live in the reality, imagine someone going through the Holocaust. If they dealt with reality, they wouldn't be able to survive. It's Vayachalom. For a Jew to survive the exile, you have to have a positive attitude. You have to dream. And what does he see on the dream? Bidei Sua Musav Arter. He sees a ladder that's sitting on the ground, but it's going up to heaven. And what does he see on this ladder? Angels going up and down. Olim v'yardimbo.
What's an olam? Is Jew?
Yes, sulam is a ladder.
No, an olam.
Olam is world. So he points out, he sees a ladder going up and down. He sees a ladder, and there's an angel on the ladder going up and down. So the question is, what do you mean going up and down? An angel comes from heaven, so it should have came down first, then up. What does it mean it was coming up and down? So the rabbis tell us there are different types of angels. There are angels that live in America, Canada, and there are angels that only live in Israel. So it says the angels were changing place when he was going from when he was on his way out. So the angels were getting ready to change. But the question is, what do you mean the angels change? He wasn't. We just said he was in the temple. Yaakov's having his dream in the temple. So what do you mean so what does he need a new place for? So the answer is because that we're always looking forward to something. So the anticipation of something good is even greater than the actual thing we get. I give the example. Let's say you have jelly beans. Who doesn't like jelly beans? But everyone has different favorite colors. So let's say you have a grape, you have a cherry, you have a lemon, you have an orange, and what?
Lime.
And a lime. So let's say everyone has how do you do? Do you eat your favorite first, or you save your best for the last?
I save my best for the last.
Irving, what about you?
I eat mine first.
You eat the best first.
Yeah.
So at first, I'm like Edith. I save the best for last. But at first glance, Irving's right. It makes sense to eat your best because I'm always eating the best. This is my favorite, but I'm always eating the worst one because I'm saving the best for last. So why do I do that? Because
it lasts longer.
It's the anticipation. Who cares about the jelly beans? How good could it be? It's the anticipation of what I'm going to do. That's the reason why. You ever see anyone like ketchup? Heinz ketchup? So one of the famous commercials they had many years ago, maybe they still have them, a person pouring a Heinz ketchup bottle and they're singing the song, Anticipation, it's making me wait, something like that. So we see Heinz spent millions of dollars on these commercials. They realize more important than the actual taste of the ketchup, it's the fact you can't wait for it to come out. Let me tell you a little secret. That's the difference between someone going to, let's say, a fast food joint where they make burgers and fries where they have it ready for you in 2 minutes, and going to a very expensive restaurant where they make you wait a long time. So the quick joint, just get your food and get out of here. But they know that, you're spending a lot of money, so they have to waste time in between meals. So the anticipation of waiting for what the next course is coming. So therefore we see that again. And that's why a Jew, to survive Golas, has to dream. You have to be able to dream and look forward to better times ahead. That even though right now might not be the best times, but and that's what I always say, what is the best day of your vacation? The day before you go. Why? Because we all make an itinerary about what we're going to do. We're going to go here, there, everywhere. We're going to go all over. But we all know what happens. Once we actually go, it never works out. This takes longer than we thought. The bus got delayed. So what's the best time of my vacation? The day before, when I think the anticipation, I'm going to do all these 100 things.
Rabbi,
yeah.
when they say the year is 57, 74, does that mean Ever since Adam, ever since Eve ate the apple?
Well, yeah, very good. Well, it simply means from the day, Adam and Eve were the day when Adam was created, born. So that's,
So we've only been around for 5,774 years?
That's our official count. Why? Because science says it's a million years.
We've been around for billions of years.
Yeah. So therefore, how do we reconcile that? So we reconcile it in many ways, but because based, how do they figure it out? By testing, they find the dinosaurs and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the different answers. One answer is that the world is billions of years old, but Adam is the seventh of this. It's a 7-year cycle, and he's the seventh world. So therefore, there are many worlds before Adam. So when you find things in the world, it was before Adam's time. Or others point out as well that by mining, he says we say it's 57 the year plus the 6 days of creation. The 6 days of creation could have been a billion years each. So if you want to tell me it's 6 billion years old, I don't care, because we go by the time of Adam and Eve. That's what we count from. But it's true, So that's what they point out. That's why we go by that number.
They say civilization began in the Euphrates and Tigris rivers in Babylonia 10,000 years ago.
Yeah. That's right. That's a discussion. Different traditions go for different things of when exactly the world was.
So when in 2040 it will be 5,800. 2040.
What will be
5,800, 5800.
All right. Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Very good. And you have the angels going up and down. It wants to teach me his potential. That it should have said the angels going down and then up. Why up and down? Because each person has to live to their own level, on their own, their own level, and therefore they do the best they can. And that's how a Jew survives the exile, by dreaming. And also I'm picking up on the things that that he has to do. Very good. So the Gemara in Brachas tells us, based on the Psukim in Sefer Bereshis, that Avram instituted Tfilas Mincha, Shacharis, Yitzchak Tfilas Mincha, and Yaakov Tfilas Aravis. And the Gemara has a dispute whether it was from the Avos or was it Keneged Karbanos, because every morning we bring the morning sacrifice, the Karban Tamid Shel Shachar, we bring the afternoon sacrifice, and the leftovers we eat, we bring over the leftover fats and etc. we leave on the Karban at night. So that corresponds to Ma'ariv. What about Tfilas Musaf? So that corresponds to Karbanos. So actually, Gemara basically assumes, we accept basically Tfilah Keneged Avos, Tfilah Keneged Karbanos, because we need Parashas Musaf. In fact, the Rambam, when he's writing in Mishnah Torah, writes the Avos instituted Tfilah, but when he codifies it in Hilchas Tfilah, he writes the Keneged Karbanos. So it's a discussion in the Gemara whether Avos or the Karbanos. So the question the commentators ask is, why is Yaakov Avinu's Tfilah discriminated against? What do you mean it's discriminated against? It's a dispute in the Gemara, and we paskin Tfilas Aravis Rishus. We paskin Ma'ariv is optional. It's no longer optional today. A good sense is we have accepted upon ourselves as a chova. But in theory, Tfilah can, Tfilas Aravis is a Rishus. So the question is, why? If Yaakov had the whole Klal Yisrael was built by Yaakov, Avram had a Yishmael and Yitzchak had an Esav, so why do we discriminate against Yaakov, who Klal Yisrael comes from? So the different schools of thought. Some suggest that maybe the only opinion, if you hold Tefillah Keneged Avos, so then you hold Ma'ariv is the same. It's only if you go Tefillah Keneged Karbanos, so then Tefillah Arvis will be Since you didn't actually have to bring a Karban, if you had the leftovers, you had the option of letting it burn at night. So that's one possibility. Another school of thought is that no, even if you go Keneged the Avos, Arvis is still a Rishus. Why? Because it says that Yaakov Avinu, as we read about, that the stones were surrounding him, he lied on the stone, he fell asleep, and the stones were protecting him from wild animals. So we see he was in a place of sakana. So really, strictly speaking, but makam sakana, one might be wise to pray, but he's not obligated to pray when they're on the run. And therefore, since he was in a state of exemption when he davened, so how could his tefillah end up being something kavua, and therefore it's only a rishus? Others say he didn't have in mind to institute a tefillah. He only did it. It's is it possible that I'm passing by the place where my father davened, I'm not going to daven here? He didn't have in mind to institute it for future generations. So different schools of thought. Why Tfilas Arvis is Rishus, but what does Rishus mean anyway? Rishus doesn't necessarily mean optional, because Tosas writes in Brachas that if the Gemara talks about, as we mentioned last week, if you're davening on Rosh Chodesh and you forget Ya'aleh V'Yavo, let's say you forget a Mincha, so the Gemara says you should be mashlim 2 Shmona Esreis. You should be mashlim. You should daven the second Shmona Esrei to make up, or actually, if you forget. Actually, the Gemara says that it does say that, but the Gemara says if you forget to daven a Ma'ariv, you don't have to go back. Why don't you have to go back? So the Gemara says, "Eima kadosh es hachodesh balayla." You don't go back because Basin doesn't meet at night. They don't makadesh the chodesh at night. So therefore, they point out that that's the reason you don't go back. So Tosas asks, what do I need that reason? What Tfilas Arvis Rishus? The Gemara says Arvis is only optional. So if they don't have to daven in the first place, why would I have to go back? So Tosas concludes Rishus doesn't mean optional, it means a lower level obligation. If you have nothing to do, so then you have to daven Ma'ariv. But if you have a mitzvah of Eretz, you have a stronger mitzvah that has to be done, so then Ma'ariv might have a lesser status than Shachar of Mincha. It doesn't mean optional in the sense you don't have to daven at all, but it's optional, lower level obligation. And that's a discussion, exactly like, because the Gemara, because also the Rishonim point out, if Ma'ariv is optional, so why does the Gemara say that if I forget Ma'ariv, I daven 2 Shemona Esrei that Shacharis? If it's optional, you have to daven in the first place. It's something that it was optional. But if you want to daven, if you want to do a tashlumin, you can. It's not saying you have to. We assume, you have to. And they give different schools of thought along those lines. So that's a discussion regarding the status of Tfilas Arvis, whether Arvis is a Rishus or Chova. So even though we pass it's a Rishus, nevertheless, we conclude Klal Yisrael accepted upon themselves as a chova. Klal Yisrael accepted upon themselves as mandatory, and therefore, a good sense is now we have to go back. So therefore it's a discussion among the Rishonim, what does that mean? Does it mean now it becomes a chova, so it's no different than Shacharis or Mincha, or no? It's still fundamentally a Rishus, but now I'm forced to I'm forced to volunteer. And that's a discussion. We had a similar issue regarding the 4 fast days. That the Gemara says regarding the 4 fast days that during the time the Tzom HaRavi, the Tzom HaChamishi, the Tzom HaShavi, the Tzom HaAsiri, Yebahem L'Sasanu L'Simcha. The 4th of the month, the fast of Yud Zayin Tammuz, Tzom HaChamishi, the fast of Tisha B'Av, Tzom HaShavi, the fast of Tzom Gedalia, and Tzom HaAsiri Azor B'Tevis, we will be days of Sasanu and Simcha. So the Gemara asks, it's an apparent contradiction. The beginning of the verse says it's a fast day. At the end of the verse, the Gemara says it's a happy day. Which one is it going to be? The Gemara says it depends. There will be 3 times in Jewish history. When it's a time of peace and we have the temple up, there will be times of celebration. When we have no temple and we're under religious persecution, it becomes a chova, the fast. However, during middle of the road times, there's no Beis HaMikdash, because there's no religious persecution, so Ratu Mitzan and Ratu Einam, so you have the option of fasting or not. So that's what the Rishonim Achronim pointing out. But today it's like Ma'ariv Kashavela Kachova. We've accepted upon ourselves in our good senses that we're going to fast, but there are differences. Since Me'ikar Adin, one does not have to fast; it's only a minhag, so therefore there are many more kulas we have on the 3 fast days, in contrast to Tisha B'Av, Shani Tisha B'Av, Shuk B'Lot Tzaras, and versus other fast days because of this issue. So that's the question when we daven Ma'ariv today. Is it fundamentally no different than Shacharis and Mincha? No, it is different, except that I'm forced to volunteer. In fact, it seems to be a machlokas to Rambam and the Ravid regarding if you're in the middle of davening. Let's say I'm davening Mincha and I realize I already davened Mincha, so now I want to make it a Nedava. So the Rambam writes you have to stop, because you can't start a tefillah a daita dechova and then close up shop that it's a rishus. You can't mix the same tefillah. And the Rabbi seems to argue and say, why not? Why can't you go ahead and let's say so that's a discussion by Ma'ariv as well. So let's say you're not sure if you daven Ma'ariv, and then you realize you daven. So if Ma'ariv's a rishus anyway, the whole thing is optional, so you're not mixing. But if Ma'ariv you've taken upon it as a chova, so then you can't make it. That's a whole discussion there. The Machlokas Rishonim, the Rambam, Rabbi, Rechayim will have to continue, but that's on the issue of what is the status of Tfilas Aravis. Is it a Rishus Achova? And what are the sources for Tfilas Ma'ariv?